So pretty recently, and depending on your definition of recently, but still recent, Atari released the VCS, or the Video Console System. I don't think that's what that stands for. Let me double check that. Scratch that. Video Computer System, which was the original name for the Atari 2600, their best-selling console ever. Now, they released this in 2021, and that kind of got me thinking, could a little company called Sega maybe do the same thing? So, with that, I'm Michael for Game Boys, and this is Game Boys Stats and Info.
This week's Game Boy Stats and Info is sponsored by the Game Boys Patreon. TheGameBoys. That's right, the Game Boys have a Patreon. And you can get some amazing NFTs. Look at all these never-before-seen Game Boys videos you can see. And all these great tiers you can join by paying the Game Boys. So, it comes in a nice phone factor as well. That's TheGameBoys.
Alright, so before we get into it, this is Game Boy Stats and Info. So, let's spew some stats at y'all. I'll try my best to avoid too many numbers and just give you all kind of some ballpark estimates. Okay, no, these are exact numbers. However, though, I'll try my best to make it entertaining by giving you flashy stuff. Or not. I don't know. It's the second episode. We'll figure it out. We're going to start with Atari and what they did. So, as most of you may or may not know, Atari really started the home game console market. I mean, there's a whole Netflix documentary on it. I'd recommend watching some of it. It kind of gets off track, doesn't touch all the stuff I want to, but I'm not here for that. I'm here for stats, here for info. And that's where you're getting. If you don't like it, you can just subscribe and like the video and show me how much you don't like it. Yeah. Huh? Punk. Just kidding, I love you. Atari came out with the Atari 2600, as I just mentioned in the intro. However, though, that came out in 1977. This is the first time America, the world, anyone has ever seen anything like this. It's a home console. Take the arcade to you. That's amazing. That's genius. That's like Albert Einstein, Picasso levels, you know? I don't even know what that means, but I'm saying it. So you better stick to it. Put on a t-shirt. That came out in 1977, and that sold 30 million units. Now, Atari came out with a huge bang. Unfortunately, from there, though, once the competition kind of picked up, and of course with the video game crash in the 1980s, they kind of went downhill from there. Every other major Atari console that they released sold less than 1 million units, which puts them at the very bottom of any list that you look at. And by my list, I'm talking about Wikipedia. That's right, not a reliable source. Sorry, Miss Kearns, senior year math teacher in high school. I have failed you. Oh well. So yeah, Atari kept trying. 82, they had the Atari 5200. And then later in the 80s, they had the Lynx. And then again, they try again with the 7200. Atari did not name their systems very well. And that has kind of been it for Atari. They stopped in the 80s. And the only thing that came out since then were maybe a couple niche handheld things where it had a bunch of the retro games on there. Or something you could easily buy at, like, you know, your local Walgreens for $20-ish. And it looked like a mini Atari and you could just play a bunch of games. It wasn't until later, much later, that Atari decided, hey, let's try our hand in making a new console. And, like I said in the intro, that kind of got me thinking about Sega. Let's get into Sega. Alright, so I loved Sega growing up. I had a Sega Genesis, and I loved the Dreamcast. Still one of my most beloved consoles of all time. And a lot of people may tell you, or at least video game historians, would internet historians talk about it? That's a great question. I don't know. Internet historian, if you ever watch this video, you want to make a video about the Dreamcast, please feel free to do so. I feel like it'd be highly entertaining. Like, for real. Huge fan, man. Huge fan. Here's the history of Sega, right? They actually started out as being like a second party, how do I describe it? Almost like used car salesmen, basically. They would take old slot machines, repurpose them, and sell them out to different casinos and gambling places around Japan. Now, when that started to pick up, arcades eventually came onto the horizon in Japan as well. Sega saw this and figured, hey, let's take what we already know about slot machines and make some arcade games. People will pay a lot of money for that, and in Japan they did. They went nuts. And also a really fun thing is in Yakuza 0, they kind of touch on this. It takes place in the 80s. You can see a bunch of the arcades there. It's really fun. Play a bunch of retro games. Highly encourage you to check it out. And from there, Sega caught the wave of the video game market. And as technology kept getting better and better, and with the success of Nintendo as well, they decided, let's play our hands in this. Sega decided to release the SG-1000 in 1983. Now, it was only released in Japan, but it did so well that they discontinued it in 1985 to release the Sega Master System. And that came out in America a year later in 1986. Off of that amazing leap to go worldwide with a video game console and compete finally with Nintendo and Atari at the time, they decided to keep going and push their luck. And this would become their highest selling console ever. That's right, it's no other than the Sega Mega Drive, or if you're in the United States, like me, the Sega Genesis. And man, was that an amazing console. First of all, it had some really great 16-bit in there. The games ran really smoothly from what I remember, and the controls were pretty easy to know. I mean, it was a nice, little controller. I'm sure by today's standards it would fucking suck, but it was not that bad. The Sega Mega Drive, aka Genesis, sold 30.7 million units, which is actually really good. Puts in the top 20 highest selling consoles of all time at number 18. And that puts it right in the league with the N64 at 32.93 million, which is 17th place, and right above the original Xbox at 20 million. The Sega Mega Drive did really well for itself, especially for releasing in 1988 and 1989 in North America. They did an incredible job, and Sega was really hoping to capture onto that. Unfortunately, though, they weren't exactly able to. They decided to get into the handheld market and compete with Nintendo. And let me tell you, man, the amount of companies that have tried to do that is crazy. We could probably do stats and info just on that. And while the Game Gear was okay, it could not hold a candle to the original Game Boy. After that, they decided to release some sort of CD system. I get where they were coming from, maybe perhaps a little ahead of their time, and so many other companies were competing with them as well. It was going to be impossible for Sega to get in there. At this point, with a couple of down years and a couple failed attempts in their belt, Sega decided to make the 32X. There was too much competition in the market at that time, and it was too expensive. And let's face it, when you got too much competition and someone else has a product that might be similar and or the same but cheaper, they're gonna lose out. The other thing is too, the console, really hard to work with and work on. Doubly that year, Sega releases the Sega Saturn. It's a console I never even really played, I never had one, and I didn't really know too much about it until I became a lot older and got more invested into the video game history and lore of gaming. From a 1994 Japanese release all the way until 1998 and in North America 1999, the Sega Dreamcast. And that was it. Didn't last very long. I'm pretty sure they discontinued it in 2001, maybe 2002. Did not last very long. And to give you an example of how the Dreamcast did, if I didn't mention already, I'm mentioning here again, just to give you all an example, but here's how the Dreamcast sold worldwide for its lifetime. It sold 9.13 million units, just below Sega Saturns of about 9.2 million. Now look, it's not the worst thing ever, and it definitely did better than some of Atari's other systems. However, though, it's still not that great, and Sega already having flop after flop after flop, and lower and lower and lower sales, and releasing an arcade-style, home console machine by the time the arcades are starting to die off, well, basically spelled the end of Sega, for the most part, and especially in the game console market. From there, Sega actually did release one console, and it was only in Japan. It was a 2005 exclusive called the Advanced Pico, and it was geared towards little kids, mostly how that little, learning frog thing was for kids back in the early 2000s. Sega did that for Japan, and that's it. That is the last hardware Sega's ever made. From there, it's been a weird, turbulent ride for Sega. They got bought out by another company. Then they had switched to CEOs several times here and there. Eventually, someone from, Rockstar and Take-Two Interactive joined, Sega. They kind of had some weird roles. They had periods where they're going to license out their products to anyone and anything, and do not Rule 34 that unless you're into that stuff. They had some interesting animations, some really horrible games, and of course, what killed probably every fan in the 90s, they basically made everything for Nintendo, or at least their own stuff for Nintendo, mostly Nintendo. You could get some of their stuff on Xbox as well. I mostly did it on GameCube and all that. And of course, you have the Mario vs. Sonic Olympics right now on the Switch. Still weird. However, things have picked up for Sega as of late. I mean, their first-party games have started to get better. Their numbers are on the rise for sales, and of course, the Sonic the Hedgehog movie is one of the better video game-based franchise movies that I've personally seen. So with all that together, how realistic is it that Sega could push out a console? To me, pretty realistic. However, I don't think they would ever do it. The first reason being is that it's probably not cost beneficial to them. And the second being is that you already have such fierce competition with the Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo that if Sega were trying to get into this market, they'd basically have to do what Atari did. So, to go back a little bit, the Atari VCS, the, video computer system, is kind of what it says. And if you go on their website and try to look at it, it's a computer. It's a mini computer. They literally will tell you that. It's running their own special version of Linux, or Linux, or however you pronounce that. Don't at me. If you do, at The Game Boy Show, TheGameboyz. You can just go ahead, say what you want. Go ahead. Go ahead. I don't care. I know. What Atari did is kind of genius. I mean, let's give you an affordable kind of mini PC that'll allow you to do some fairly good computer basic stuff, and you can run a gamut of games on there thanks to the Linux software that they have installed. Now, Sega could easily do the same thing. However, I think their strategy is working out well for them. You don't need to spend the time on research and development. You don't need to spend the time on products. There's a global chip shortage anyway. And let's face it, if they can make their bank off of the movies, they might be able to easily make more money on those than they could with their consoles. Now, am I still hoping for a Dreamcast 2 or Sega to just randomly release or announce something? Of course I am. Do I think it's going to happen? No. But hey, here's to hoping. Thanks for watching, y'all. Michael out.